Hello and welcome to Post Sports Live. I'm Gene Wong. Joining me this morning to discuss the stories that matter most to you in the world of sports from the DMV and nationally is our three-member panel from the Washington Post sports staff. Starting with, in the first chair, Neil Fancy Stats Greenberg. In the middle seat, Adam Kilgore, national sports reporter, and from the DC Sports Blog, Scott Allen. And today, we got all DMV sports for you. We're breaking down every one of our teams and even looking at 4 sports cities, of which DC is one. We'll examine that later in the program. But off the top, it's the Washington Wizards who are gearing up for a playoff push. They're locked into the 5th seed after the Chicago Bulls last night beat the Brooklyn Nets. So, Adam, I guess we'll start with you. We've seen a bunch of different rotations off the bench. They're going to shorten their bench, obviously, in the postseason. That's generally what happens. What should that rotation be? Who should it consist of?
I think they need to play big, certainly against the Bulls, because the Bulls have that great front court. I'm curious to see how much they play Otto Porter, because he has been really good on the stretch, like shockingly good for considering how he played for most of his career to this point in the NBA. But I also wonder how much run he's going to get, because last year on the Nets, Paul Pierce was similarly bad as he's been this year, like down the stretch in the regular season. And then he was excellent in the playoff series the Nets had. So I think that the biggest question for me is how much Otto Porter plays. And I don't think it's a great opponent for him because the Bulls are such a tough, physical team, and that's not really his game. Like he kind of slashes to the hoop and doesn't play really physical kind of defense. Sure. So I kind of wonder how he fits into the series. But I think he's probably the X factor if they have a chance.
Well, Neil, Jorge wrote about Nene playing center and then having Humphreys and Drew Gooden to stretch fours. How does that shape up for you in the playoffs? Is that the rotation?
I mean, I think they're going to have to get everybody involved. I don't think necessarily it's going to be this is your 5 guys, this is who you roll out. I mean, they struggled down the stretch. Wizards have struggled during the season. I don't think that we can look at this team and say, okay, this is it. This is the formula. Maybe they strayed from it before, but the biggest keys, obviously, John Wall, Bradley Beal need to be hitting their shots. John Wall needs to be running the offense, and then just getting good basketball. We've seen this team play poor basketball. Just play good basketball. It doesn't matter who's on the court. Just get the job done.
Yeah, Scott, is it important for Randy Whitman to have a solid rotation, or is it kind of just a feel for him and what's working right at the time?
I mean, he's been experimenting down the stretch here, trying to get it right. I think the positive thing for the Wizards, even though they kind of struggled down the stretch, is that in some respects, I think he has more options this year. I think last year you look at the Bulls series, and in 3 of those first 5 games, 7 guys played at least 10 minutes. This year, I think with Chris Humphreys back from the groin injury, does Kevin Seraphin get a look? I think he might be the odd man out. Ramon Sessions obviously spelling the guards. I think he's got a lot more to work with this year. It's about him pushing the right buttons, though, depending on the matchups, whether it's the Bulls or the Raptors.
Well, better matchup for them, the Bulls or the Raptors. What do you say?
I'd say the Bulls. I mean, kind of just based on last year, you kind of got that in your back pocket. They dominated them this year as well, and the Raptors have kind of had their number.
It's funny because if you looked at it on paper and they had never played the Raptors or the Bulls, you would definitely want to play the Raptors. But for some reason, the Wizards seem to match up better against Chicago.
All those bigs,
and I think Humphreys is a key too. Like he seems like a kind of an agitator. Like he can get under the skin of a guy like you can tell him and Noah will be face to face
and
every
Pierce
game.
and Noah. I mean, how much is Pierce? Do Pierce's minutes now increase? This is what they got him for, right?
This is what they got him for.
Yeah. I think you'd have to. Otherwise, why'd you get him in the first place? You kind of kept him under wraps for most of the season. I know Nene's health kind of dictated that a little bit, but for the most part, Paul Pierce, you brought him in for the playoffs. You got to get him in there. At least see what you have there. At least see how much of a difference.
And the pattern of the way they arrested him too seems like they've been kind of
preparing for this moment,
for
right?
The playoffs. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Neil, I'm going to stick with you because we're moving into the Capitals here, and obviously another playoff run for them after they missed it last year. Neil, how far can this team go realistically?
I mean, this is a strong team, and the Eastern Conference is a strong conference. I mean, they're going to play the Islanders in the first round. That's not a gimme. But some of the projections out there have the Capitals as the second most likely to win the Cup behind the New York Rangers, and that's a pretty strong endorsement. I mean, it's Rangers, Capitals, Montreal, and then the Blackhawks. I mean, those are 3 Eastern Conference teams, 2 of which the Capitals may have to go through in the playoffs conceivably to get there. I mean, the sky's the limit. The blue line's deep. Holtby is playing great in goal. And Alex Ovechkin is Alex Ovechkin, the best scorer in the game. I mean, if everything clicks at once, like it has to in most playoff runs, there's no reason why this team can't, at the very least, make an appearance in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Adam, have we not heard this scenario before? This is a team poised to go to the Stanley Cup, and then what happens? You lose in the first or second round, right?
This team feels a little bit different. They're a little more under the radar.
Yeah.
They're a little more physical for sure than they've been. I guess they got a little more physical under Hunter and Oates, but now they seem like a very competent coach in a lot of ways. So and also it seems like Holtby gives them a chance to beat any team they're playing. If he keeps playing the way he has, the Cats have never gotten that sort of like hot goalie or like the big sort of.
They always run into the hot goalie,
You're
right?
right. It seems like Holtby has a really good candidate to be the hot goalie this year. And so if that happens, I like their odds. It's funny too, like they were just savage when they signed Orpik to that big contract, and like it might have been a bad deal, but like if you overpay for a house, you still have to live in the house. So now they have this like good defensive guy who might not be worth the money, but you have him. He makes them a better team for the playoffs.
Scott, how far can this team go as far as you're concerned?
Well, I mean, Adam mentions Holtby, and I think the last time the Caps caught a hot goalie, you got to go back to '98, and Ole Kolzig
It was a pretty good one.
Took him to the Cup. It was pretty good that year, and I think that's the difference in the storyline this year. The front line scoring is there. Can they get second line scoring? There's no questions though between the pipes, and that's different. I mean, who would you rather have in the net? I mean, we talked about Montreal potentially having to go through Montreal and Carey Price, but I mean, the only questions about Holtby are whether or not he's been worn down this year with so many consecutive starts. But I mean, his play of late would seem to indicate that he's ready to go.
Well, Neil, Alex Pruitt wrote a little story today about how the Caps are a bigger team. They're more physical. And Barry Trotz was saying when he's played them, it used to be you never thought, well, it was a tough game. It was all skill. How much difference is that going to make this year going in for them?
It's a huge game because versatility is key. You don't know who you're going to play. They have the ability to match up with teams through scoring, through physicality, goaltending, defense. I mean, this really is probably the most balanced team we've seen. I know we've talked about before how good they are and how deep of a run, but this team is different. It is made up differently. It is made up much stronger from the blue line and in goal. It could be a good run for the Capitals this year.
Well, since we've talked about both our playoff teams, the Wizards and the Capitals, Adam, I'll go to you for the tie-breaking question. Which one will go farther in the postseason, the Wizards or the Capitals?
I think it had to be the Capitals. The Wizards, I think they have a chance to beat Chicago, even though Chicago is on paper like way more talented and deeper than they are. I just think the Capitals you could see the Capitals in the Eastern Conference Finals. You can see them making the Cup. You can see them going, like for all the reasons we talked about, you can see them going pretty far. I just can't see any situation where the Wizards get past. They might be the Bulls, but they have no chance against the Cavaliers. And so I would say the Capitals for sure.
Well, Eastern Conference and the NHL very strong. In the NBA, not as strong. Does that give the Wizards any more of a chance, or are you still on the board with the Capitals?
That's true. Even though the Capitals have to face an old nemesis in Halak in the first round, and then potentially Lundqvist in the second round, I still agree with Adam because of Holtby, because of some of the other things we talked about. The Capitals inspire more confidence at this point in the season than the Wizards have.
And Neil, I'm guessing you're going to make it unanimous, right? The Capitals go farther.
Yeah,
than the
without
playoffs.
that. I mean, Wizards are going to have a tough go, I think.
I should correct myself. They'll play the Hawks in the second round, not the Cavaliers.
But
they still have no chance to win that series.
Does the weight of expectations change anything as far as the Capitals are concerned? Because they've been in this position before, where the Wizards not necessarily a team that's been picked to go very far in the playoffs. Scott, I mean, is that if you're a player, does that mental pressure get to you at all? Especially guys that are on that team like Backstrom and Ovechkin who've been there, who've not lived up to the expectations or what they're predicted to do.
Right. I mean, you've got guys like on that team talking about how last year kind of humbled them, that it wasn't kind of an expected thing to get into the playoffs. So I think kind of new mentality under Trotz. The Wizards, you talk about expectations. I mean, the beginning of this year, people are talking easily 50 wins and building off of last season.
They got
the
close.
Wizards got to the second round. So I don't think the expectations will factor into it.
Does that matter, Neil, what happens in the past?
I mean, I'm sure it does, especially facing Halak. I mean, there's a ton of history there.
Right.
And, you can only rely on Ovechkin's individual performance for so long before you really do have to take a look at his playoff performance or just under the team in general.
Yeah.
But, look, the Islanders are as good of a matchup as they could have gotten in the first round, avoiding Lundqvist and the Rangers, avoiding Price and the Canadiens. So, they gotta come out. They gotta be able to neutralize that fourth line of the Islanders and get some secondary scoring. I think they'll be fine.
We've talked about two teams that are heading to the postseason. let's get to a team that's just started the regular season, the Washington Nationals. Adam, I'll start with you on this one. Not a good first week of baseball for the Washington Nationals. What are your impressions?
Horrendous first week of baseball for the Nationals. I mean, their starting pitching has lived up to the billing. They've been excellent, aside from the blip by Jordan Zimmerman yesterday. But their bullpen is a disaster and needs to be fixed. I mean, they even talking to a few scouts, I was out at Camden Yards last night and just kind of chatting with a couple of them, and they all said they thought the bullpen was kind of not going to be good coming into the season.
Yeah.
And that was and that was even before they traded Blevins, who was excellent last year, has been good for the Mets so far. So that's an issue. I mean, you can't panic after a week of baseball games, or you can't worry after a 2-5 start, or whatever it is now. But you can sort of pinpoint issues they have, and the bullpen is a big issue. I think the defense will fix itself. It's been embarrassing so far, but I think it will get better. The bullpen, it's hard to see it getting better without making some kind of change.
Neil, obviously, for a 162-game season, panicking after a first week is probably not the best decision. But are there some flaws in this team after the first week? Is that your impression?
Yeah, I mean, there's flaws in every team. I think that the starting pitching is what made them the World Series favorite, right? There was their lineup's not healthy. I mean, I think once the lineup gets healthy, Ian Desmond settled down the field a little bit, maybe not have so many errors.
Yeah.
Then, the bullpen, though, is going to be a problem. Losing Tyler Clippard has opened up a huge hole in that bullpen, and it's not one that they can fix internally. So it's going to be interesting to see how they manage the bullpen, how they use their situations to try to eke out some of these wins.
Scott, you remember famously Aaron Rodgers after the Packers lost said, relax.
Relax.
Is that the policy Nats fans should be taking, or should there be some concern right now about what's going on after the first week?
You can listen to Aaron Rodgers, or you can listen to Uncle Ray Knight, who's still rosy about this season outlook, feeling good about that World Series prediction. I think there's some legitimate reasons to worry, and it starts with the bullpen. I mean, you look at the hitting so far. They're got Worth back yesterday in Boston. Still without Rendon, still without Span, as Neil and Adam alluded to. I think that's going to fix itself.
Yeah.
But I mean, opening day, the defense kind of setting the tone there with Max Scherzer pitching a no-hitter, and Ian Desmond lets the ball drop, charged with an error in between him and
The first
Uggla.
of many errors for Ian Desmond.
Yeah, when your offense
So
isn't
far.
there because of injuries, and the Nats have been decimated by injuries, you need pitching and defense. And so far, they've had one of the two, at least in the starting rotation.
This is like really narrative-y, but I think there's some truth to it. Like it feels like they're playing the same brand of baseball, and they haven't recovered from the playoff series last year. They're, like these games for the first week have all seemed really similar to that series. Like sort of like shaky defense at the worst times, zero hitting, sort of like bullpen implosions at the worst times.
Solo home runs.
Yeah, solo home. It feels a lot like they can't sort of get over that. I don't know if it's mental or it's just kind of the team they are right now. They just can't get over that hump though. It feels just off.
Well, Adam, we talked about this off camera about Ian Desmond's errors. That's something you think he's going to eventually correct by the
Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, he's got to figure out what the heck is going on early in the season, but it's been the exact same thing like 2 years running. I think it was last year or 2 years ago, and whichever one it was, the other year was very similar. He had seven errors through like 17 games, and then went 59 games, more than 2 months without making an error. So he's sort of gone through this before. But he's got to stop going through it. It's like just field the ball in April, man. Like it's not that it's like act like a normal big league shortstop.
Well, Neil, this team's actually not close to being healthy. So is that something positive that the fans can look at, saying maybe once they get healthy, it's going to get better, or is that nothing to do with what's going on right now?
Yeah, there's no reason to panic. I mean, look, a couple games, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. This is a long season. They have the starting. I'd be more worried if there was an injury to the starting pitching and things started to fall apart than Desmond having the yips. They're going to be fine.
And even then, you got a sixth starter in Roark
Right.
ready to come in.
There's no reason to panic.
We've gotten to our three teams that are actually in season right now. The Washington Redskins are off season, but of course they always make headlines at this time of the year. There's news that they may be moving to Loudoun County, or at least the Virginia governor, Terry McAuliffe, is trying to actively court them to come to Virginia to play football, to build a new stadium there, to get out of Maryland. Scott, I'll ask you, if they do make this move, does it make a difference if they play their home games in Virginia?
In terms of making a difference, Dan mentioned it in his column a couple days ago about how maybe that allows the Ravens to have a little more inroads in PG County with the Redskins moving even farther west. it makes sense from a team standpoint, I think. I mean, if you're not going to be in the district, most fans more fans in Virginia than anywhere else. It's already a pain to get out to the stadium in Landover. So for me, I mean, personally, if you move it to Loudoun, maybe it's equally painful and a terrible experience. I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference in terms of the team standpoint.
Adam, there are any number of NFL teams that don't play in their quote city. For example, the New York Giants, they don't play in New York City. So does it really matter if the Redskins play in Virginia, or if they play in PG County, or if they play in DC?
I think to some extent it does matter. I mean, they've more or less sort of, like little by little, they've become like Virginia's team. I think already, regardless
Training
of like,
camp there too.
training camp in Richmond. You know, obviously like the political ties with the Allen family. And you know, it seems like a very it's a trend that's already started. I think it does matter. I think if you turn your back on the city that your name is sort of under, those people are gonna it's gonna matter. It's already a city that, you know, whose loyalties inherently don't necessarily run that deep. I guess that, you know, with the Redskins it does, but you know, people are coming into that town more than other towns.
Transient,
We
very
have a lot of that in our newspaper this morning.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, it does matter. It will have an effect on the sort of shape of that team's fan base in the future.
What's your take on that, Neil? Does it make a difference if they play in Virginia?
I don't think so. The NFL is so big everywhere that they're going to get the fans, they're going to get the money. For me, it comes down to accessibility. I mean, you mentioned the New York Giants and the Jets. I mean, that, even though it's not in New York, it is still extremely accessible to get to for New York-based fans, even those on Long Island. You know, that's not the situation we have here. It is a chore to get to a Redskins game,
That's
especially using
that's being generous.
public transportation. I mean, there's like a mile walk that you have to do uphill both ways in the snow, no feet, to get to the stadium. So that to me is a huge hurdle. And if they can, if they can fix that part of it, then a large part of the unhappiness of the fan base, I think, goes away. In terms of getting to the stadium experience.
Well, Scott, wouldn't the dream for most Redskins fans be to build on the site of the RFK Stadium? I mean, don't you think that would be the ideal, or at this point, does that make a difference?
No, I think absolutely. The dream would be to go back to a smaller stadium on the site of RFK. Heck, move back to RFK and make all of the seats bouncy. I think that would be like everybody's dream. The thing is, they've already turned their back on the city and moving to Landover. And sure, the Capitals and Wizards played in Landover for a long time and moved into the city. But I mean, whether they're in Maryland or Virginia, I think the thing they got to worry about, if it is going to have an effect, is, like I said, moving out of Maryland, kind of giving the Ravens a chance to pounce on those disgruntled fans that are kind of on the border there of Redskins Ravens fandom.
Well,
and the name is kind of the biggest stumbling block, right, of where this team goes. I don't see DC committing money if the name.
that's
doesn't
that's another half an hour program. We can talk, but
Special.
our talking points, first four talking points, actually lead perfectly into the last topic, which is DC fans and this project that I know Scott and Adam, you're working on about 4 sports cities, DC of which is one. Adam,
Shout out to Keith McMillan for his great work on the
yes,
project.
absolutely, Keith too. Redskins editor Keith McMillan, absolutely all
I
over
have
it.
nothing to do with it.
But we want your contributions too, Neil. But Adam, I will lead off with you on this one. Is DC a good sports city? Being one of those 4 sports cities, would you call it classified as a good sports city?
I would classify it as a great sports city. I
And
really
why is that?
like DC as a sports city. You know, I feel like the fan base is not as it inherently is like deeply rooted as a place like New York or Boston or the Bay Area, or even places that just if you grow up, say you're like 50 years old right now. There was a 2-year period in your life when there was only one pro sports team in Washington.
Yeah.
Because the Bolts were still in Baltimore.
Yeah.
The Capitals did not yet exist.
No baseball.
And there was no Senators.
Yeah.
So I think that inherently makes a fan base like different than a lot of other cities. But the fans that have been that are here, whatever generation it is, are just as passionate and if not more passionate and more. I think there's like a certain sophistication to this market, like for whatever reason. I don't know exactly why it might be, but I think fans here are really smart and sophisticated. And it's a great sports town. I think there's like a shared history among the fan base that's unique because so much history is recent. I think that really comes through. I think it really came through in Steinberg's great story this morning. Like all this history is like it's very much of this like 1 or 2 generations because it's kind of all happened to them. People aren't talking about like Tris Speaker and Babe Ruth are all talking about, Wes Unseld is like as far back as it goes. And he's not that long ago.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very cool. I think it's a great sports city. I like it a lot.
Well, Scott, what makes a good sports city for you, and is DC included in that conversation?
Well, first, I want to say I am very touched by Adam's answer and surprised by that answer as a DC native and lifelong DC sports fan, because it does get a bad rap. And whether people are
there is a lot of misery in recent DC sports.
There was. And I don't think that
that helps make a good sports city in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
think that winning is we talk about what goes into a great city. I don't think that winning is a prerequisite. I mean, you look at this is not a great example because Chicago had the Bulls.
Blackhawks.
And the Blackhawks. It's a terrible example, actually. But, I mean, Cubs fans, you'd say, that's a great sports
It's been a long time for the Bears as well. So
I think starting with having 4 teams to root for, that's DC, one of 12 cities. I mean, that's pretty great to have sports year round, to have some rooting interest, even if it's misery most years, as it has been in DC. But for me, it's the loyalty. I mean, people talk about poor regular season attendance. That is almost universal. I mean, across sports. Yeah, Verizon Center fills up late. That's just kind of the way DC is. But I think you notice in DC, come playoff time, I don't have a problem with the so-called bandwagon fans. You've got your kind of loyal fans who were raised here. If people want to hop on the Caps bandwagon or the Wizards bandwagon, do it. I mean, it's great. Verizon
That also
Center's
happens
rocking.
every city.
It does.
it does. Atlanta can't. There's no one at the Braves games.
Exactly.
Right?
Atlanta is so disillusioned. We make the playoffs every year. Let's not
and
sell
no one
our
goes.
baseball games. So,
Neil, even though you weren't part of the project, we want your input on this. Is DC, in your mind, a good sports city? What makes a good sports city for that
Well,
matter?
I don't think you can have 4 pro sports teams if you're not a good fan city, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing. And what I like about I grew up in New York, so I know what it's like to be a diehard fan and everything like that.
Yeah.
But what I see in Washington is the fans will root for a team that's good. That's not to say that they're a bandwagon, but they demand excellence from their pro sports teams. And that's what you want in a fan base. You want a fan base that supports the team and a team that supports its fans. I think it's almost part and parcel with what goes into
Isn't
it.
that Adam referred to the sophistication of
Without a
sports
doubt.
fans?
I mean,
Is that
and
especially for Capitals fans, right? Is that
without
not the
a
case?
doubt. And it's I agree with Scott. This whole notion of trying to scare away bandwagon fans or whatever, you should bring them into the sport because that's especially. That's how you get a growing fan base. The team does well, other people take notice, and then they start to fall in love with the storylines and the players, and then they're lifelong fans. That's how it works.
There's like never any menace in a DC sports crowd. Like you go most cities, it's like there's like an anger and a tension. It's just like northeastern cities.
Yeah.
Like an A-Rod?
Yeah, well, just not even that, but just even like that. I love Baltimore, but no, but it's just like you feel like you're there to have like fun, and it's a really enjoyable experience, and there's not like. Even though things go bad so often, I feel like every game is like sort of starts out with like a pretty like positive, like happy vibe. But and I think that's different from a lot of other northeastern sports cities.
when was the last time you were at FedEx Field?
That was a good point. Well, that's in Virginia though, or Maryland, wherever it is. Yeah.
Wherever they play.
Well, Adam, we will end on that with the last word, and you kind of described the program. Very positive, always fun. Sometimes things go wrong, but at the end, we always enjoy ourselves, right? So for Neil Greenberg, Adam Kilgore, Scott Allen, I'm Gene Wong. Remember to follow us on Twitter @PostSportsLive. We'll see you next time.